While we are live with Marty up north. Marty, thanks for joining us in Grimerica Outlawed. We wanted to chat with you. We've been, of course, everything going on in Canada, and Darren's back on X. He's been back on X after, I think 2 days after Trump was inaugurated. He all of a sudden, one of his appeals worked. So he's back on, reading your work on X, and he's like, we should get Marty on and talk about Canadian energy and all that stuff. So you are here. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
How are things, guys? So I'm glad to be back. It's a crazy, 2025 is off to a crazy start. I mean, I always joke, like, did you have this or that on your bingo card? I mean, I had Trump on my bingo card, of course, but I didn't have the craziness of the leadership debate with the Liberals. I didn't have Jagmeet Singh coming back and whatever. I didn't have Trump coming so hard with tariffs. That's a fact. So it's been interesting. Keeps us busy.
51st state. I mean, the Carney versus Ruby.
Carney versus Ruby.
Ruby, we got to talk. I mean, we'll talk about that later. Ruby Dalla, though, as she's.
Ruby. Yeah, I'm not used to her yet. She's such an outsider. Yeah.
But I mean, she's really sounding like some common sense there. But I mean, before we get into all that other stuff, like, let's get into the energy stuff a little bit. Hey, Darren, you wanted to talk about that? So.
Well, yeah, because the last time we talked, I didn't realize your background. We knew you. I knew you as an influencer. I didn't realize your background in Alberta energy, which is suddenly at the forefront of the world in some ways, because it's about to get interesting. I mean, this all obviously better than we do, but we've been talking about how we've got these 4.5 million barrels of oil a day, and there's really nowhere else for them to go, and the infrastructure to do anything with it is decades away at best. But at the same time, I feel like they're gonna bend us over for it. I really feel like this is gonna be some answers. So I'd like to know your thoughts on that. And I'd also like to just get into, because I don't think a lot of people realize the situation that Canada's in with its energy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just for the audience, when I talk energy, sometimes I got a bunch of people that say you're full of shit, Belanger, which is my last name, right? and I literally had a pretty cool career in the energy industry, right? I mean, I'm an Alberta engineer. I spent 35 years working in the oil patch, and the first 20 years in the oil patch, for me, were in the field, like close to the wellhead where it's being drilled and stuff like that. So I have intimate knowledge of producing energy. But then the last 15 years, I moved to Calgary and I got on into some really senior roles. And so I was the director of operations for Keystone, the Keystone pipeline, not Keystone XL, but right. We built Keystone, and my team operated Keystone. My team was busy with the design of XL, so we tried to get XL going. So we'll come back to Keystone and Keystone XL. And then my team worked on Energy East. And I think that's one of the things that maybe sparked that interest this week, right? I put out this tweet late last week about why I don't think Energy East succeeded and why it won't get revived. Because with Trump right now, there's all these talks of reviving pipelines. And it was funny. I put out a pretty detailed tweet on why Energy East won't work. And I got guys that sort of try to come over top on me and go, well, we can solve those problems. I'm like, dude, I lost 2 years of sleep trying to fix some of these problems. So some of the problems are pretty big. And so hopefully we can talk in some detail on some of these things, because energy is very complex and people tend to super simplify it, including Trump. Like when I listen to Trump right now, it's Trump, right? I mean, the art of the deal. He talks a big story. He talks he's a big guy. But even some of the things he's been saying lately, I'm sure he's got a couple of advisors going, "Come on, Donald, you can't say that, or what you're suggesting is way more complicated." So yeah.
But it does sound like they're almost energy. They have enough energy for themselves almost. It sounds like they're just about there. Like they really don't, it doesn't seem like they need to import a lot, to be honest.
Well, they have the same problem we have, I think, but they're a decade away from that too. You know, you can't just turn it on, is my understanding.
Yeah, so let me break it up. So first of all, there's multiple kinds of energy, right? So some people say, what do you guys mean when you talk energy? I mean, we can talk electricity, we can talk oil, we can talk natural gas. So the talk mostly is around oil these days. The Americans, I put this out on Twitter last week. The Americans consume every day about 12.5 to 13 million barrels of oil. I love throwing that number out, right? Like 12 to 13 million barrels a day, not a month, not a week, not a year, a day. And they currently produce about 9. So every week they're short. Every day they're short. They're short the 4 million that they're currently importing from us. And there's a couple of things, right? So if they wanted to be energy independent when it comes to oil, they would have to find quickly, you know, Donald said, we don't need somebody else's oil. We'll drill, baby, drill. I'm like, okay, that's, you know, you're missing 3 to 4 million barrels. The best wells that you'll drill nowadays in the US are like 500 to 1,000 barrel a day kind of wells. So even mathematically, he's going to need like 20 to 40,000 wells. It's like, sounds like, you know, and that's not that manageable. I mean, in a good year, the Americans drill like 10 to 20,000 wells. So could they do it in a couple of years? They could, but it would literally take them a couple of years to find those good wells. And then by the time they got those wells drilled, the ones that they currently have would have declined. And so, you know, they're on a treadmill. So could they get to the 13 million barrels? Sure, they could, but it'll take them 2-3 years. So what do they do in the meantime, right? They're not going to shut us off. Like, that's not going to happen. They're not going to shut us off while they drill, baby, drill. But while I've been talking like this, there's one assumption, there's one thing, there's one big giant caveat. The oil that the Americans produce everywhere in their country is this light stuff. And you can't make diesel with their light oil. And that's one of their big problems. And so they import from us, because they're missing some oil. But the other reason they import from us is our stuff comes from, you know, from Athabasca, from Fort McMurray, like the heavy oil stuff, the tar sand that people like to call it. That's a really heavy crude. And that's what's used to make diesel. And so the Americans love that stuff. It goes down Keystone. And then from Keystone, it goes to, you know, refineries all over the place. So, you know, they would have 2 short-term problems. I mean, if they want to be energy efficient, they would have to drill and replace what they buy from us, but that would still, they still wouldn't get diesel. And if they don't want to buy oil from us, then they're going to have to buy it from Venezuela. So when I see Trump posturing like he is, I'm not worried. Honestly, I'm not worried at this point.
Go ahead.
A lot, eh?
Yeah. Well, do you think so? I'm not worried either. I mean, I'm not worried if I'm Alberta. I'll tell you, if I was Ontario doing anything in the auto sector, I'd probably be worried sick right now, because we went over it on the show last week. You know, they literally moved this car manufacturing 50 miles up the road from Detroit and started making the cars and shipping them over the border. And I think that is 100% going to go away in a large capacity. And I've even thrown in the wild card that I think he's going to offer some of those people citizenship to go down and run some of those factories. But that aside, I don't want to leave the oil thing just yet. It was actually your director at Keystone tweet that was the one that first piqued my interest, because it does put you in a sort of, everyone can talk this, that, and the other, but you know, you know what the pipeline situation's like. So I don't think I'm really worried about that either. I mean, I often say on the show that I think it's, when I look at the Alberta oil reserves and I look at where the pipelines go and I look at the history of America and oil, I mean, Alberta's always been destined to become part of America eventually, either by hook, line, or sinker. I mean, because if we shut off their oil, they're going to come and get it. I mean, that would all probably, because what if it say, can we shut off the oil? Is that even possible to shut off the oil without destroying the fields, the all the facilities that are in the thing? The wells are pressurized. Like, what does that look like, trying to shut down or slow down the 4.5 million barrels a day?
Oh, it's always a problem, right? I mean, because the most of our oil comes from way up north, like I said, in Fort McMurray, and it's produced using what's called, SAGD, steam assisted gravity. And so you have to spend, months injecting steam in the ground to kind of melt the oil in place, and then you pull it out. If we stopped all of that overnight, like, it would just make a mess, and we'd have to restart it. But yeah, we're not going to get there. So, I mean, if I was Pierre or anybody in Ottawa right now, I would actually let Trump do. Actually, let's go back though. Like, let's listen to what Trump said. Right? He kind of made it clear in the last few months. Like, it goes all the way back to his debate with Kamala before Christmas, before getting elected, and then after getting elected, he's had a common theme that he's talked about. Right? He wants to try and kickstart the U.S. economy. He wants to give his own people a tax break. So that's where he got this idea of tariffs, which on their own, tariffs are a bad idea. But he's trying to justify, like, how do I impose tariffs on people? So then he turned around to us and he's like, your border's unsecure. You're not meeting your NATO commitment. My north flank, whatever, is exposed to threats from Russia. So he's kind of like, he's made these pretty reasonable demands that if we meet them, then the tariffs in essence go away. I do think that behind the scenes, he's got guys that are telling him, Donald, like, if you slap a tariff on them, they'll slap a tariff on us. And, both sides just end up losing and the consumer pays more. So, maybe we'll come back to that. But, and in the short term, you're right. So Ottawa, Ontario says they're worried. So they're thinking of slapping counter tariffs on the US. And then everybody's looking at us at Alberta and saying, what are you going to do? I mean, we don't need to do anything. Like, I honestly think we don't need to do anything, that we keep selling to the US. If the US does slap a tariff, I think what we'll do is we'll keep selling to them at a discount, because we have no choice. I mean, we can't shut in that oil. So if the US does a tariff, we would be screwed in a sense, because we have nowhere else. Like, we can posture all we want at, saying we'll sell our oil to somebody else. We can't sell our oil to anybody else. Not right now. I mean, the most we can do is about 1 million barrels a day via Trans Mountain yeah.
What about train?
To the US?
To anywhere, like, how much, just like to get it out into the thing, like, how many barrels are in a train car if you're looking at that route?
Oh yeah, like, it's so minuscule compared to pipeline. A train. Don't quote me, but a train car is something like 4,000 barrels, and even if you do a unit train of 100 trains, you're doing 400,000 barrels. I mean, Keystone delivers that. Keystone delivers 1 million barrels a day, effortlessly, cheaply. The problem with the train is you send them. It's the same problem as sea cans, right? You send the trains one way, and then you got to bring them all back empty. So there isn't if there was a commodity, if we were sending sending full trains and then bringing them back full, I don't know, seawater or something that we wanted in exchange, another liquid, but there isn't. Actually, what could we ask for? Send them the oil and send us back barrels of Jack Daniels and bourbon.
Seed oils. Yeah, we'll take all their excess seed oils now that they don't need them anymore. We'll just, we can supplement our canola crop. So what about Monica Lansing is asking in the chats, hey, Monica, what about the Balkan fields in South Saskatchewan, North Dakota? Anything going on with them?
Yeah, they exist. They're just small, right? I mean, in Canada's energy mix of oil, like Canada's oil and gas energy mix is 90% in Alberta and 10% in Saskatchewan. So it's yeah.
So even if it's a big one in Saskatchewan, it's still small compared to the overall. Yeah,
totally. The oil sands up in Fort McMurray are hard to the size of them is unfathomable for most people.
Yeah.
It's just we do have the world's third largest oil reserves. Like, it's just big, like big. Yeah. Oil's not going anywhere. That's the other, I said the US was consuming 12 million barrels a day. The entire planet exceeded 100 million barrels a day like last year. There was and like since the 1970s, the demand for oil around the globe has never slowed down. I shouldn't say that. It slowed down briefly during the 2008 crisis, and it slowed down briefly in 2022, or COVID, right? For sort of geopolitical reasons. But the appetite of humanity for oil ain't going down, man. Like it ain't going down. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't want to go on too much of a tangent on this because I do want to keep talking about the logistics of the pipelines and the energy because I think it's important. But I want to shelf this for later because this peak oil thing keeps moving. It keeps moving. You know, when I was a kid, it was coming. And now it's, you know, I haven't heard anyone talk about it for a while. And it seems to me like the earth just keeps making more of the stuff, you know, as quick as we can use it. What's your philosophy on that? I mean, you're a lot more in the know than I am. Obviously, I'm running on conspiracy theories and old documentaries. So
I like that theory. So I started my career in the oil patch in 1989 in Fox Creek, Alberta, northern, you know, not northern, but mid northern Alberta. And I remember when I settled down there in Fox Creek and I was working, there was old timers there who'd been there, you know, they were my age now. They're in their 50s and 30s, and they're saying, hey, kid, don't settle in too much. You know, this oil is done. Well, I still visit Fox Creek. I have family there. I still visit northern Alberta, and those places are booming. Like, because like we keep drilling wells, right? We never stop drilling. And so a couple of things. The technology for finding oil is phenomenal. Like it's incredible where we find oil and how much of it. And the technology for extracting oil is getting better. Like there's still oil, like there's still wells that were drilled in the 50s and 60s that are producing. Like I don't even like to say this out loud because most people, you know, I just make people happy. I go, oh no, we're just going to drill the well, and then in 5 years it'll be off your land. No, it won't. Because these things produce forever with the technology. We can literally go back in old fields and keep finding oil. And to your point, I'm starting to believe that theory that is being produced internally and you know, it doesn't necessarily it doesn't just need like dead dinosaurs, dead plants, dead algae, dead plankton. I think it's being formed. And the reason we suspect that now is because the most basic oil, the most basic hydrocarbon, like pure methane, has been found like on the moons of Venus and has been found in the universe, right? So and the most basic hydrocarbon is methane. It's just carbon and hydrogen. And carbon is like so abundant in the universe, and hydrogen is like the sun is all hydrogen. So why wouldn't it be made, right? I think it's being made. I truly do. And so so there's two peak oils. We you know, there was the guys who talk about the peak production. I don't think we've seen peak production yet, not mathematically. And then there's peak demand, and I don't know where peak demand is. Like that's peak demand. Yeah.
Well, I mean, China still. I remember hearing in 2009 or 2010 about the coal plants in China.
Yeah,
they were creating. I can't remember if it was 3 a week or 1 every 3 days, or every 3 days. But I mean, it's still happening. This is like 15 or how many years later? Like 15, 17 years later, and I'm hearing about it again. I'm hearing about all these. So there's obviously a huge demand.
Have you guys been to China? Like, have you been to China?
No.
Okay, so I've been to China through work. I used to have to go to China, and I would go to manufacturing cities like Chengdu, for instance. And don't quote me exactly, but I think China has 40 cities. Okay, 40 cities in China that have more than 10 million people. Yeah, like we don't even have one in Canada, right? We don't even have one. The big 10 million cities close to us are New York and LA and places like that. China's got 40 of those things. And when you go to China, like for me, it's stressful. Man, I live in the country. I mean, if I'm driving a truck and you're half a mile in front of me, you're too close. So, and when I go to China, it's a massive humanity. And what do they want? They want what we've had for the last 30 years, man. There's still people in China. They've never had a car. So they want a car. They want a shitty little car. They want a fridge. You know, like there's still places that have I swear to God, I don't know how they refrigerate or how they store stuff, but they don't have the things we have. So, and that's China, India, Brazil. Like there's like 2 million people or 2 billion people on this planet, maybe 3, that are living in what we call the second world, and they want what we want. Never mind the third world. They're so far behind. They just want clean water. So, the consumption. Yeah, I've heard that quote. I think in China it's like 1 power plant every 3 days is being fired up, right? And they're not burning natural gas; they're burning coal. We shut down our coal here in Alberta during Notley. Notley shut down all the coal-fired plants, but the mine in Grand Cache, the mine in Chetwynd, those mines, they're still working, but they're selling the coal to China. It's crazy.
And my point was that obviously the demand is still there for cheap energy and cleaner than coal, maybe, but I mean, I think we're going to have technologies that transmute the exhaust, and these plants won't be as environmentally dangerous either. Like whether it's gas powered or diesel powered or coal powered. I mean, the technology's coming that will be able to really, really scrub the exhaust, like scrub it to the point where we're basically just producing oxygen out of the plant.
I think we're already there. I found it frustrating. I found it frustrating in 2016 here in Alberta when Notley, like we had brand new 2 state-of-the-art coal-fired plants, like state-of-the-art.
Right.
And she made them shut down and then convert to natural gas. And I agree with you. The emissions coming off either or were the same, man. It's water vapor and carbon dioxide.
Oh man, it's just so frustrating. Yeah. It's so and it's my friend said to me the other day, like, and I was like, I couldn't believe it. I hadn't really thought of it like this, but he's like, we don't have a stable government. Like our governments in the West aren't stable. I'm like, well, what do you mean they're not stable? I mean, I always thought, yeah, of course we have stable governments, but no, this is what he's talking about. It is depending on who gets in and what kind of like new programs they're pushing or which ones they're shutting down. Like how can people invest in that kind of environment?
I could talk about that too. I mean, I've been in room. I worked on a project called Goldboro, which was an LNG project out east in Nova Scotia, and we had. I need to go back to that story because we'll come back to it. Suffice it to say, I was in rooms with bankers. I ended up flying to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur, because we were meeting with bankers there. And this was in about 2017 or 18, somewhere around there. And the bankers, they humored us. They listened. We did our sales pitch. We were looking for $4.5 billion. We had loan guarantees. We had sold 30 years worth of gas to the Germans. The engineering was done. We had permits in place. We just needed the money. Because that's another thing I'll talk broadly. Canada has no money. Like Canada's economy is 3% of the world. So anytime we want to build anything here of significance, we have to go elsewhere in the world because we just don't have enough money here to do it. So we're in Kuala Lumpur. They humor us. And then at the end, they're like, yeah, it's an interesting project, but we're not interested because it was too risky to do business in Canada. And that was one of those epiphanies for me where you have what I would call a second world nation telling me that I've become a second world nation, that it was too risky to do business in Canada.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, well, I guess while we're on that, I mean, I did want to ask you about this because I saw this floating around too. I haven't fact checked all these, but I mean, it seems like, and I wanted to talk to you about because your east one is in here too. But I mean, these are supposedly the canceled energy projects or investments just from 2015 to 2020. I mean. Yeah. That's a lot of, stops and starts and people putting time and energy into stuff that doesn't get. And now it seems like it's all intentional because now Trump's coming up and there's, like Darren mentioned, or you mentioned at the beginning of the show here, there's nowhere else to go for us. So if we don't sell to the States, it's not like we can just turn left or right and go across the ocean or something.
We've been, I got to be careful with my words. We've been proverbially shooting ourselves in the head for the last decade.
Right.
Like Trudeau, Guilbeault, all those others. Like, it started in 2014. I mean, to be honest, right up until everybody always talked about the boom bust cycle of oil and gas. You guys are in Saskatchewan. I'm in Alberta.
Yeah.
Everybody always talked about boom bust. But the reality is, from about 1985 to 2014, the cycles were mild. There just weren't any cycles. They're very, very mild. And then 2014 was a big one. 2014 hit hard. Price of oil drops to 20%. And what our leaders in Ottawa should have just said, what our leaders in Alberta at the time, said was, we just need a little bit of help. You need to help get out of the way and let us build Trans Mountain, and we'll be fine. Like, that's what we said in 2014, right? Like, during the downturn, you take advantage of the downturn to build more infrastructure. So 2014, first downturn, try to build some infrastructure. Ottawa flatly says, no, they're blocking us. I went out east, and when 2014 hit, I swear to God, there was a cheer out east, because people who had forgotten that cycles are normal saw this big downturn and they cheered. The Quebecers, especially, and some of the Ontarians cheered, because for them, this big downturn was the beginning of the end for Alberta. Like, they're pissed off at us. They've been pissed off at us for 25 years because
maybe more than that. I mean, you see those memes going back 100 years.
Yeah, because we're supposed to just make energy, pay our transfer payments, pay our taxes, and not try to influence the political landscape. But we got too powerful. And, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, we got too powerful. So when the downturn came around, the people out east are like, finally, those guys are down. And then for the last 5-6 years, they've been betting on that. Like, they've been literally trying to knock us down. And anybody, like today, when you hear them talking about, join Team Canada, and we should have seen that this was coming. Like, everybody's suddenly waking up to Trump and going, shit, we only have one market. We only sell to the US. Everything that's wrong today, we've been bitching. We've been warning them about this for decades, right? Decades. Like, let us build pipelines this way. Let us build pipelines that way. Let us develop nuclear energy. Let us stop being dependent on oil. Let's properly plan for the future. When the Liberals talk about planning for the future, full of shit. They're planning for their future, not the. So the country right now, especially in the last 10 years, has been leaderless or led by complete morons that are completely ideologically driven. And look at the mess we're in. Like, we're backwards, man. We're totally backwards. We're pre-2014.
Oh, yeah, it's broken. We're broken.
Yeah, totally broken.
Yeah. I think it's beyond repair, but I mean, we don't have to get into that yet. Darren,
no, it's not beyond repair. No, it's not. Yeah.
That's
something we could argue about. But Darren, do you want to continue on with the resources of the oil at all, or anything like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, what about liquid natural gas? What's the process? So I guess before we jump to that, what is the timeline to get? I mean, assuming we got approval tomorrow, they're like, make the Trans Mountain pipeline. Make a pipeline to Hudson's Bay, we didn't bring that up, but is Hudson's Bay more reasonable of a spot to try and get to than to try and get all the way to Newfoundland? I mean, most of the landowners are between here and Hudson's Bay, probably, though.
Yeah. So let's break it down a couple of ways. So, Trans Mountain the original Trans Mountain was built in the 1950s and is still operating, and it operated brilliantly. All we wanted to do was twin the darn Trans Mountain, and it ended up taking about 5 years to twin, and it cost like $30 billion, right? So, like, if we do all projects like that, then there's nothing economic anymore. But I'll say this: I think Trans Mountain was an aberration, and if the government got out of the way and let Alberta properly build Trans Mountain, we should have built that in, say, 2-3 years for $10 billion. So I think we can go back to the old rules, and shit can be built, and if you do it in the national interest, and the national interest, like I often say this, we couldn't build a railroad across the country these days. But in the 1800s, we did it because we recognized that it was in the national interest. So some of these pipelines, I think, fall in that category. But the way it's been working in the last decade is, if it falls in that category, the government says, well, we want a piece of it and we want to be involved. It's like, no. All you need to do as the government is say it's in the national interest to build a big pipeline somewhere, whether it's out east or up to Manitoba and Hudson's Bay. The government just needs to say it's in the national interest to do it, and we're going to facilitate it. That's it. And then industry will take care of the rest. I mean, could we build Keystone down to the part 2 of Keystone in 3 years? Absolutely. It can't be 2 years. Like, I'll tell you that right now. You know, unfortunately, when you're talking projects that big, you know, what's the expression? You know, one woman takes 9 months to make a baby. You can't throw 9 women and make a baby in 1 month. Like, it's
where does Keystone go again?
Keystone leaves from Hardisty, central Alberta, and goes all the way to Texas, like to the Gulf Coast.
Okay.
And
so central Alberta all the way down to Texas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And Keystone's already built, and almost all of Keystone XL, like XL was the extension, like, is, you know, call it extra large or whatever. So Keystone could be built in pretty quickly, and it would double the oil output from 1 million barrels a day. It would add another 1 million a day. That one, I think that one, if there's rumor that Trump's going to reapprove that one. But boy, on our side, the companies who've been burned, like it's TransCanada. Like, do they want to? And TransCanada sold it to somebody else. Like, do they want to? Do they want to do it? Yeah, you know, they've been burned.
And what happens in 4 years when it's like, you know, you're not even done yet, or you're close to done, and then somebody else comes in and cancels it?
Yeah. Energy East was a beast. I worked on Energy East. So Energy East was an attempt to get oil from Alberta all the way to the East Coast, to St. John, New Brunswick.
And that's because there's a refinery there, right?
No, it wasn't to get to them. In fact, sure, they'd benefit, because along the way we were going to drop off oil in. There's a refinery in Montreal. Like, the refineries in the East Coast, the refineries in Montreal and Ontario, their oil comes from overseas. They import their oil and then they refine it and make gasoline. So we were going to build a pipeline in TransCanada all the way to the East Coast, and we were going to take Alberta oil and dump some of it in Montreal, dump some of it in Quebec City, and dump some of it in New Brunswick. But we were going to be so big that we were going to deliver a million barrels, and along the way, like, drop off 200,000 barrels every day to those refineries, and then the rest would go overseas. So we would stop. If we built Energy East, Canada wouldn't import a dime of oil from anybody else. Which is one of the most ridiculous things, right? Third largest reserves on the planet, and 33% of our daily consumption of oil in this country is imported.
Oh, that's so sickening.
It is sickening, you know, and that's Montreal, and all the oil that's refined in Montreal, Toronto, and those places is imported from Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, places like that.
Was there ever a plan just to go to Hudson's Bay, like Darren mentioned, like to go through to maybe even where Manitoba is or Ontario, or is that never really a thing?
It's never been. The reason it was never really studied in the past is two main reasons. One is building up there would be a nightmare. Like, you know, there's just no infrastructure, right? How do you get like all that gear up there to build? And then the other problem is that Hudson's Bay freezes in the winter, right? So because it freezes in the winter, then it's only useful half the year. But now people are bringing it back around because there's nuclear powered icebreakers, and then so you could have a channel, because the Russians are doing something similar. The Russians got pipelines that go all the way up, and the Russians are building refineries and shit in like, look at where they're building, like in the top north there. They're building in Siberia. So it's like, okay, if the Russians can do it, then, you know, we should be able to. But Russians are different people, right? I mean, if they want to build a refinery in Siberia, they kind of like force 50,000 people to go live there. You and I aren't going to want to go live in Thompson, Manitoba. Not easily anyways. Yeah.
I don't know these days, the way the cities are. I mean, I just moved to a small town. I just moved to the middle of Saskatchewan from Calgary. I mean, Calgary and during COVID, and I'm like just getting as far away from the cities as I can.
Yeah, but that's like the middle of nowhere, you know, that's through the woods into
now go back to that map. Just bring up that map real quick. And you know, there's one small exception. So we send our oil down to the US. Alberta makes, let me round it up, but Alberta makes 4.5 million barrels a day of oil. And we send about 4 to the US. And then we keep 400,000 for ourselves here. That's what, and for you guys, that's what we refine and turn into diesel. But some of the oil that we send to the US actually comes back up to Ontario.
Oh, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it does come back up down in that Michigan Peninsula. Like it comes around right in the middle there. Exactly. So there's pipelines that go around the Great Lakes and then come back up into Ontario, and so that's funny because, one of the things that's being bounced by Ottawa is that they might force us to shut in some of our oil. And we said, well, if you force Alberta to shut in some of our oil, we're going to starve you guys in Ontario. And then people, and then the Ontarians are like, well, we'll just bring it in by boat. I'm like, okay, over frozen St. Lawrence and over the frozen Great Lakes, knock yourself out. Like people always forget that these lakes freeze. As big as they are, they freeze. So you kind of want your oil to flow year round, not just and
you can't send enough on the trains, eh?
No, you never like the volumes are big, man. It's
more than you can fathom.
It's more than you can fathom. And then I get in trouble because I suggest this on Twitter I suggest it about every 6 months. I get mad, right? Every 6 months I get mad and I say we should shut the gas to Eastern Canada because the oil, they import their oil, but they don't import their gas. The gas comes from Alberta. So almost every drop of natural gas burned in Ontario and Quebec comes from Alberta through the big Trans-Canada pipeline. And I always say we should shut that in and let them freeze in the dark. And I get accused of like wishing harm on my fellow
Team Canada.
And I'm like, yeah, but now you guys just told us that we're going to have to shut in and like make up your mind.
Yeah.
That's
pretty funny.
Yeah.
So so I mean, it seems like do you feel like it's I've got so many questions, Marty. Part of it is like, where have you changed your mind politically or about some of this stuff? Or have you always kind of been a bit of a dissident when it comes to, like, let's say, the agenda that has stopped a lot of this progress has been based on a climate change stuff from the WEF. And I mean, Canada's like the vanguard in pushing this bullshit. Have you always been there with this stuff? Or like
No.
when we look at that list of all the council projects, it makes you feel like, or makes me feel like it's intentional. Like it's just like, stop all the progress in the West and,
No, it's intentional. I mean, let me answer your first question. So young me up until 2014 couldn't care less.
Okay.
In fact, wasn't even political, right? I people say you seem pretty political. I'm like, let me go back. Let's say you stopped me in 2012 and you're coming at my house. We're having a beer in the backyard and you said, hey, Marty, you realize that some of your taxes are going to Ottawa and getting wasted? I would have said, no, I don't give a shit.
Yeah,
because in 2012 I would have said, look, I bought a house, I'm living in it, it's not paid for, but I own it. The kids are in high school doing okay, boys can play hockey whenever they want, pickup trucks full of gasoline, and I get to go to Mexico every winter. So did I give a shit? No, didn't give a shit. In 2014 when we had our downturn and then we elect Notley and Trudeau, working on projects like Energy East, we're asking for a little bit of help from Ottawa, kind of like, hey, I've been part of this country for the last 20 years, haven't asked for much. Can we get a little bit of help? They didn't help. I'm like, oh, okay, that's unfortunate, right? Piss on you. I'll remember that. But didn't give up on Canada. Then comes 2018, 19, then there's COVID, and then there's 20 when we, Trudeau elects Guilbeault and others. And then Guilbeault starts talking his net zero, no more gas vehicles. Everybody's got to be electric. All projects are going to be blocked because we're going to do Bill C-69. Bill C-49 will have a tanker ban. I don't want you guys owning guns. I don't want you guys owning land. I mean, I'm an oil and gas guy who lives in the country and has a bunch of guns. So what's Ottawa for me? they're existential, man. They want me gone. So you're right. It's not just, they're not just trying to slow me down or interfere with me. I honestly think they want me gone.
Yeah. And I've been saying lately, like, to me, I don't understand why they made it so hard economically on people. Like, I feel like they could control us more if there was some prosperity there, if people were just living their best life, if they could afford stuff, if they had some savings, we'd be like just grease in the palm of their hand. They could do whatever they want with us. But now people are struggling. Like, I agree with you. I wasn't political either, but now it's getting to the point where it's affecting me directly. The mandates, all the bullshit that we went through during COVID, and now the economy, the carbon taxes we're paying, all the corruption in the government that is so obvious, and the lies that are so in your face. It's like, what is going on here?
Yeah, well, let me put it to you this way. So in 2015, when Trudeau first got elected, even though I wasn't very political, I had some political knowledge. I was like, oh shit, we're in trouble, right? I kind of thought we're in trouble because the reason I thought we're in trouble in 2015 is because I thought this guy's going to be the prime minister for the next 20 years.
Wow,
okay? He's going to be because well, think about it, right? He's got the right last name. His last name is Trudeau. I mean, sure, he stutters or whatever, but he can work a crowd. He can schmooze a crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 2015, when Trudeau got elected, I'm like, oh shit, we're in trouble. This guy will be there forever. And the other thing that worried me about Trudeau, and I don't know why he doesn't do this, but I was worried because I thought he'll get the vote in Ontario and Quebec every year. And then all he has to do is throw Alberta a couple of carrots just to get a handful of votes from us, from you guys, from BC. And then that guy will stay in power for the next 20 years. What he's done in the last couple of years surprises me. I don't understand why he shits on Alberta and Saskatchewan so much as he does, because like I said, if he just threw a few carrots our way, we'd keep paying our taxes and everything would be hunky-dory. When I think about why Trudeau does that, I think he truly hates us. And I say that, like, imagine you're Justin Trudeau and you're 12 years old and you're growing up. And you hear people talk about Pierre, his dad, right? Oh, your dad was great. He was a visionary. He was this, he was that. And he transformed the country. He heard his dad was great everywhere except where?
Alberta.
He came to Alberta and everybody said, screw you. Your dad was an asshole, energy policy. So deep down, he has this sort of loathing for us. And he's been on video many times. I speak French, right? You guys know that. I speak French, and so I can listen to Quebec radio stations and old interviews of him, and I don't have to read the subtitles. I can see what he's saying. And when a young 20-year-old Trudeau was interviewed, he truly did say, that the socioeconomic fabric of this nation is better served when it's led by Quebecers, and he went on to say the greatest prime ministers were Laurier and his father Trudeau and Chrétien, and he feels that Quebecers have this inalienable right to rule the country. Like, he truly feels that way. He definitely has a disdain for us. I mean, for Alberta is a place where we should just shut up and pay our taxes and send him money, and BC is a place that should just shut up and let him come surf. And so he's paying for that. In the end, it's normal, right? These egomaniacs, these narcissists, they eventually destroy themselves. Like, he could have been in power in our country for 30 years.
Well, that can segue us into the Quebec separation. I've seen some stuff that's kind of coming back now.
Well, wait, before we get into that, because I wanted to ask Marty if something to do with Quebec running the country and the equalization payments has something to do with them not signing the Constitution Act. I mean, I feel like Quebec could upend the 1982 Canada Act pretty easily at any given time, maybe even in court.
Yeah, I mean, Quebec is Quebec, right? So like I said, they're my cousins. I do have family in Quebec. I think Quebec is just simply good. You got to admire one thing about Quebec. They get what they want. Like, how they get it pisses me off. What they get pisses me off. But I do have to admire the fact that they get what they want. So I don't know exactly why they get equalization or why they get all this favoritism. I mean, some of it is part of the Constitution. Most of it is just the size of who they are, right? What are they? 74 seats, 84 seats. Like they're literally a big giant chunk of. Look at today. If you look at the polls today, where's the last place where Trudeau's still hanging on? It's Quebec. Like he's, on the island of Montreal. He's even lost Toronto at this point. So Quebecers, you can blame what they get through the Constitution, but at the end of the day, it's even the Constitution was just them being getting what they wanted. They've always done it. I mean, they have and I use that as an example. Like when I'm unhappy and people say like, why are you as an Albertan so pissed off? Why would you want, this and this and that? And that's my excuse. I generally say, I just want the same fucking shit that Quebec gets. Like they're good at getting shit. So to your question, I don't know exactly why, but they're good at getting shit. Like really good.
Really good.
Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really good.
All of our money. And
yeah. Equalization is bullshit,
really
right? Like equalization is like, quite literally the bulk of the money from equalization goes to Quebec. But once it's divided by per capita, like, we're sending them a ton of money that ends up being peanuts. Like it's $800 per Quebecer. I don't even know why we bother doing that. Like there's, and then we send about $2 billion that goes to New Brunswick and PEI and the Maritimes. And for them, that ends up being about $2,000-$3,000 per person. So let's scrap equalization and let's have just one little thing that says that we recognize that the small provinces like PEI and New Brunswick will never achieve sort of the economies of scale because they're too small. So yeah, let's just agree that Ottawa gives them $3 billion a year. Don't call it equalization, just call it welfare for New Brunswick.
that everybody pays into.
And then Quebec, no bullshit. You don't need an extra $800. You know what Quebec does with the money we send them? Like they spoil themselves, right? Like it's bullshit. Like they keep claiming, it's to give ourselves whatever equal services. Everything in Quebec is better than we have here. They spoil, like, you go to Quebec and they take our money and they give themselves free university with it.
Yeah, and you look at the childcare is another big one, right? In Alberta, you're going to pay $800, $1,200 a month to get your kid in some decent childcare. Well, you're equalizing someplace so that they can subsidize it down to $150.
Yeah, if it was real equalization, I'd be into it, but it's not real equalization. And then the equalization doesn't factor the fact that their wages are cheaper, their housing is cheaper, everything is cheaper over there. Like they don't need that money. They have so much money that they just blow it on themselves. Hey, what are we going to do with the transfer payments this year, boys? Free tuition to everybody. Like, yeah.
So on that, because I think if I remember correctly, you're a few hundred years of your family being in Alberta. You've been, I guess your family's been around for a few separations attacked. It seems like Quebec is sort of leaning back into maybe talking about separation again for the first time in, 30 years. Last time, I think they came within 1% of leaving the country. And I don't know. I mean, maybe you can correct me on this because I've only been out here 20 some years. But I don't think I've ever seen Alberta separation higher than it is right now. Just the amount of it's always sort of been in the background, sort of, you see the odd sign but I mean, it's everywhere.
Well, Graham and I were talking about that just when you left briefly. Like the typical Albertan of 15 years ago didn't care about any of that, right? Like I said, if I was sitting in my backyard in 2012 and you told me I'm spending a little bit of extra money, my transfer payments or equalization payments are being wasted by Quebec, I wouldn't have given a shit. Because we had good jobs, we made good money, gas in the truck, and the kids are playing hockey. It's changed in the last 10 years, and Albertans are waking up. It's a slow awakening, but it is, we more and more of us are realizing that we're not getting a fair deal. So, and that was the first request of that. That's the first thing we started hearing in the last 10 years is like, we just want a fair deal, like and we're not getting them. I mean, look at the examples of this week, Ottawa calling us not part of Team Canada. I'm like, well, like you want us on Team Canada, but you don't want us to have like key players. You want us to sit on the bench and pay the $200 tuition fee so that you guys can keep playing. So that's not fair. Look at some of the things that happened in the last year. The Liberals gave a break to the Maritimes on home heating, on carbon tax on home heating oil and free heat pumps. And then we said, where's our stuff? No, you don't get that. You keep paying your carbon tax. So the country's not being treated the same. And then there's the deep stuff. Like, we don't get the proportionate number of seats, right? I mean, I live in Rocky View County, and my riding is like 144,000 people or something like that. We got one MP for 144,000 people. PEI has 400,000 people with 8 MPs. So what is that? Like, that's one MP for every 50,000 people. Like,
what's Quebec's breakdown to?
It's lower than ours and higher than PEI. It's like it's 80,000 per riding, but they still get a disproportionate number of ridings. But even if you completely made it proportionate, like even if one MP for exactly every 100,000 people, we'll never get what we want, because Ontario is now up to, I don't know, 13 million people, and Quebec's got 8. So that's 21 million people there. And what are we? 4.5, and you guys are 1. So the people, that's a meme I post all the time. Like, when you look at that map of Canada, I can't remember. I think it's the 54th parallel. Like, if you draw a line on the 54th parallel, which is like just over Toronto, half the population of Canada lives under the 54th parallel in Ontario. Like, that you don't need, that chunk.
That's where the cars are made, right where that white dot is, right outside of Detroit.
That little chunk around there, and then goes up a little bit towards Ottawa, Ottawa and Montreal. Like, that little part of the world, half the Canadian population lives there, and they decide, like, our giant country is the rules are made up by a small group there, and the country is almost too big. Like, within the country, I count about, I don't know, 7 different cultures, like, very distinct cultures, right? The Newfoundlanders, man, like, if you've been to Newfoundland, you've met with the Newfies, right? They're their own group. And then the Maritimers in general, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, they got their own way of life. Quebec definitely got its own way. Ontario definitely got its own. Us
you could cut Ontario into 2.
Yeah, and
sure,
you cut Ontario into 2, because everything north of, like, once you get like 5 hours out of Toronto, then it's, I mean, you could probably like make that its own province, and like they would probably be closer to Western Canada than.
Totally. BC, same with BC, right? I mean, northern BC loops in with Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, very similar, but the island of Vancouver and the lower mainland, that's a different culture. And then you got the Northwest Territories. So we're trying to, and then you can think of, like, you'd think that people would agree on some fundamental things, but we don't. Like, the attitude towards guns is very different from one part of the world to the next, or one part of Canada. And who makes the rules around guns? People in Toronto, who have no appreciation for how we view that. Well,
that begs the question: where do you see this at? So, is the fervor higher than you've ever seen it?
Yes, totally.
By like magnitudes?
In fact, I don't want to put the cat out of the bag too much, but I'm involved in a lot of backdoor discussions and movements, and I know that there's, for us, it started last year. It's not a new concept, right? Trying to get a fair deal for Alberta is not a new concept, and people, as long as like 15 years ago, even Harper, before he became prime minister, he advised Ralph Klein, like, God love Ralph Klein, King Ralph. So Harper, when he was just a young politician, approached Ralph and identified, 25 years ago, hey, Ralph, Alberta's not getting a good deal. You guys really should start preparing for this, right? He could see the writing on the wall. And Harper and a bunch of others proposed what they call the Alberta firewall. You know, they said, start looking like Quebec. Set up your own provincial police force. Set up your own Alberta pension plan, your own tax collection agency, and a few other things, and then start getting ready, because Harper and others said to Ralph, like, before the, you know, in the next 25 years, 30 years, you guys are going to seriously realize that you need to be independent. So you need to get prepared for that. And that talk in Alberta is so common now. Like, everybody, like, there's a big movement to get our own police force. You know, the whole Coots bullshit, everything that happened during COVID, everybody's pissed off at the RCMP here. So we want our own police force. We want our own pension plan because we're over contributing to that. We want our own tax collection agency, because that way, if Ottawa wants to send money for equalization, they'll have to first collect it from us before they can send it. So, so that firewall discussion has been revived, but now people are literally saying, screw the firewall. Let's go right to referendum, right to independence. So behind the scenes, there's still people going, whoa. Let's do
Make sure we don't lose.
Let's make sure we don't lose. We don't get, you get this once every generation. So you get a vote once, but in the short term, we're trying to convince people first to get, you know, the Alberta pension plan, the police force, our own tax collection, those kinds of things.
Well, how has the Trump rhetoric about the 51st state and people now, like, really, like, that has got people, like, we were surprised at how many people were like, oh, Team Canada, you know, and it's like, where has everybody been for the last 4 or 5 years when we're losing all our freedoms and our economy, and now all of a sudden they want to fight for Canada? Like, and so, you know, Darren and I have been talking about how good it would be to become a part of the States for a long time. And now that he's mentioning it, it seems to have got everybody in a tizzy, but it's also increased the interest in literally Alberta becoming a state or moving. Like, how has that sort of confused that whole movement, or has it helped?
No, it helps with the discussion. So what it does, let me break it down. So here in Alberta, a lot of people are saying, what would be solved by joining? So it helped clarify the discussion. So the question is, what problems would Alberta solve by joining the United States? And when you start rhyming off a couple of problems, you go, well, we'd be a little more productive. We'd have lower taxes, and their constitution's a little bit better, and their dollar's more solid. Then everybody goes, yeah, but we could also solve all those things pretty quickly on our own. So the discussion actually helps solidify the idea that we should be on our own. And then when you really start thinking about it, you go, listen, there's 50 states, and even as strong as Alberta is, if you ranked Alberta with say on a per capita GDP with the other states, we'd still be like 47th or 48th, right? So would we get the full attention of their Washington? We might even be further than we are from Ottawa in terms of their attention, and we might get just as abused.
Well, you'd have to bring Saskatchewan with you. I mean, you can't leave us alone.
No, I want to bring Saskatchewan and a chunk of northern BC to make sure we have some coast. Trust me, I'm and the Yukon, right? But I'm not convinced that joining the U.S. would solve our problems. I'd rather definitely take a crack at solving them on our own, and then if we struggle a little bit, then we join afterwards. And I think most Albertans right now see it that way.
Would that change if Trump actually followed through with his no income tax thing?
That I'll just leave and move over there. Like, I mean, you know, I already have an H-1B visa. So,
well, let's be honest. I mean, Alberta as an independent country would not have an income tax likely either. I mean, none of the countries that we can look to as examples that are sitting on the kind of reserves with the infrastructure to get those reserves to market that we have right now. You know, none of those countries are paying income tax. The states that have oil aren't paying state income tax.
Yeah, and depending on the group that you put together, if you take Alberta, Saskatchewan, a chunk of northern BC, you end up with a country with a GDP of about 550 billion, which puts us in like the top 20, 25, right? Puts us right on par with countries like Israel, Ireland, South Africa, whatever, Sweden. So we become and that's with the current numbers. You do that as an independent Alberta. We're no longer sending, or independent Buffalo, let's call it, right? And so now we're not sending money to Quebec. There's no assholes telling us, hey, you got to slow down your oil. We double our oil production. We
NATO contributions are no trouble, so we don't have to worry about an army.
Yeah, our border is protected just as much. We have, it's, we'd have a little challenge with the national parks and some of the natives and stuff like that, but we already have treaties signed. We have all that. It's like I don't think it's
I'm an Indian, and I'm telling you, for like the Indians, it's anything's better than what's happening right now.
Totally.
Going to the States people say, they had their trouble. Yeah, they had their trouble, and they've moved through it, and they've negotiated a deal that is 20 times better than the Indians in Canada are getting from the Canadian government.
Yeah.
And if Alberta's going to go this route, they're going to have to go this route, making deals with these nations that are going to be, like, it's not hard. Indians are fucking stoked to get away from the Indian Act. We would love to get rid of this shit, but it just needs to be done with a fair deal. It can't be just like, yeah, man, we're done with that. You're on your own. It's like, no, we got to work some shit out. We don't want everything. Just what we're on right now would be a good start.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. Yeah, like anything's an improvement. What was I going to say?
Well, I wouldn't mind teasing out, because how do you think that works? Because it's got to get, exponentially more complicated to just start including Saskatchewan and then a part of BC. Does that have to be a sovereign Alberta first, and then it slowly starts to expand? Or
that's not a question for me. I mean, that's do this podcast with bring Leighton Gray next week or whatever, and ask one of those constitutional guys, and they're Alberta and Saskatchewan joined very on the same day, simultaneously, under exactly the same rules. So I think for the two of us, we would just we could literally merge instantly, and instead of two premiers, we'd just have one, and change the tax code and a few things. Like those two joining would be super, super freaking easy. I think what would happen is one would do it first, and then let's say it's Alberta that becomes the first independent state. Then another group like Saskatchewan would quickly say, "Hey, can we join you?" And we go, "Sure." So and you leave Canada the same way we did. You settle your debt, you say goodbye, and then you make a deal with Alberta. I think it's pretty manageable.
Well, then if you're talking about Yukon and northern BC, then now you're getting into Diagolon territory. I mean,
it looks exactly like Diagolon, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to throw the curveball in there that even with the U.S. is about to do a bunch of oil expansion in Alaska, how's that oil getting to market? It's throwing in this other curveball where they're going to have, pipelines or some sort of. Do they need better roads coming through?
The U.S. already gets it out to market. The U.S. gets it out to market through Valdez, Alaska, right?
Through ports.
Yeah, I remember the Amico Cadiz and the Valdez disaster. Like the Americans can get it, but I just you just reminded me of something. So this chat about the 51st state is a little bit interesting, right? I've asked this. What do you think? Like right now, if you ask people, would you join the U.S.? It's about 30 to 40% of Canadians, off the cuff, say yes, right? If you got into the details, I think it'd get lower. But quickly today, about 40% say yes. It's highest here in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and it's lowest out east. Surprising, maybe not. But the Quebecers are resisting that forever and ever, because look at the sweet deal they're getting, right?
Canadian.
So that's the first thing. But if I had asked you in 2012, hey, do you want to join the U.S.? 2012, 10 years ago, what's your answer off the cuff?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't have.
See, it's mixed, right? So, or let me say, if I asked you this 2 years ago, when Joe Biden's crawling around stage shitting his pants, looking where the hell he is.
Well, I've heard that argument, but I still got to say yes, because at least my governor has real power.
Yes. Yeah, the governor has real power. The Constitution's different than ours. There's certainly advantages, certainly. But then I ask it, there's all these other questions. Is Trump can say what he wants, is Texas going to let us join? Because Texas, like right now, Trump won, but in a typical election year, that country is like split 50-50, right? Like it almost always leans Democrat. So is Florida and Texas going to let anything from Canada join?
Liabilities.
Fuck, man. By their standards, we're a bunch of liberals. So they don't want us. And then do they, and then to my fellow Canadians, like same thing. You ask a Quebecers, like, why do you want to go to Quebec, to the States? They go, oh, I get a better salary and lower tax. I'm like, yeah, but you're going to have to work. What do you mean I'm going to have to work? It's like, it's lower salary, better taxes. But the reason is because they're productive and they work. Have you ever been to the US? People down there work. So I have news for you, Quebecers and Torontonians and mainland British Columbian. Joining the US would actually mean that you're going to have to work for a living. Here in Alberta, we're already working. Saskatchewan's working,
Dude, that's hilarious because like this morning we left the hotel and I'm like, there's no traffic here at 6:30 in the morning.
They're not working.
I feel like this whole city is still asleep. We just had this conversation this morning. I was like, if we're in any city this size in Alberta right now, we'd be jammed up at this Tim Hortons trying to get a coffee. And we just drove right in. There's nobody on the roads.
Exactly. So you've lived it. So so joining the US, you don't suddenly become rich. No, you become an American state and you have to fend for yourself, So I don't think most people, I truly don't think most Canadians would do well in a republic like the Americans have.
Without the social net.
No. They wouldn't do it because, you're expected to work. You're expected to be productive. You're expected to pay for a lot more things for yourself and not be dependent on the state. I mean, can you imagine you show up, you're Canada, you're Quebec, you join Confederation in the US, and the first thing you say is like, where's our free healthcare? And what do you mean the Insurance Corporation of Quebec doesn't exist anymore? They'd be like, there ain't no state insurance. There's no state insurance in any state in the US, man. It's all private. Right? It's all private medical. It's all this and it's all that. That would just shock the shit out of us. And that would be a deal breaker. Imagine Quebec. Yeah, we want to join the US, but we want to keep our massive social safety net the way it exists. Americans would be like, whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What do you predict? How do you see this sort of unfolding over the next, like 6 months and then to 5 years and then to 10 years?
I think
from a strictly Alberta standpoint, sort of.
It depends on a couple of things. Let me take Trump out of the equation in the short term. It depends on what happens in Ottawa, right? That's the other thing we often talk about here in Alberta. If the Liberals manage to cheat another election, which I don't think is beyond their capabilities, like they could do whatever the frick and they'll figure out some deal. They'll put in Carney. You already heard Jagmeet Singh today saying, if Carney's in, I'm not going to defeat him. He's already reneging on that. They could go right to October 2025. If the U.S. keeps threatening what they do, they could declare another Emergency Measures Act, and they could say there's no election this year, blah, blah, blah. If the Liberals steal an election, the temperature in Alberta for independence will be like through the roof. So that's one thing. But let's say everything goes by the book, and then this is what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that the Liberals elect a new clown. Who cares? That we go back to Parliament in March, and that the government is defeated right away, and Poilievre gets elected. If Poilievre gets elected, and Trump will have tried his tariffs by then, I think the temperature will come down. Trump won't be threatened by Canada. Everything will be okay. And I think we go through a period of about 4 years where things are pretty good. And then what I'm watching for is will Poilievre be able to, we said earlier, is the country broken? I don't think the country's broken. I just want it back the way it was in 2014 at this point. Right? Get rid of net zero, fire 200,000 civil servant, bring the budgets back down to $500 billion a year, slow down immigration, cut my taxes, and we're good to go.
Guns back. Need my guns back.
And my guns back.
A small little list of impossible things.
None of those are impossible, man. Those are all super easy to do. And then everybody who's going to bitch is like, counter the bitching by making sure that you kickstart the economy.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I try not to get too negative and black-pilled about it, but it's so, I mean, the medical system is fucked too. I mean, it's just, it feels like we're infiltrated from the top to the bottom. Whereas, and I know it's bad in the States and a lot of those aspects too, but it's a different infiltration. It's kind of strange. It's hard to explain, but have you thought about going into politics? Like, were you going to be a senator at one point, or did you think about that, or were you offered it, or were you joking that time, or?
No, I get offered it all the time.
Do you really?
I get, like, I've had lots of people that say that I would be easily elected as an MP or an MLA. I'm 58. I just recently retired, and my kids are all older, and I feel like I've done my bit, so I don't feel like being in politics, and I don't think I think they're just pumping my tires. I don't think I'm electable. I'm too opinionated, and that doesn't work in this country.
Well, it might be changing though. I mean, honestly, like, so I heard. So a couple thoughts. First of all, you might be able to do more outside the system. You might be able to do more, just advisor, like sort of a consultant kind of advisor type thing. But when I heard Ruby Dalla talk, I mean, she was like, she's this entrepreneurial woman. She's been in politics before. I'm like, this lady is talking some common sense. I mean, she's running for the Liberals. I'm like, is this like? And now the Liberals are complaining she's like a plant from the Conservatives, right? Because she's talking about just like getting tough on crime and all this stuff. But I feel like we're ready for honest politicians that can have a long form conversation. Like, I do think that is changing, and it's going to change even more. So you might be more electable in the next 4 years than you ever would have thought you would have been in the previous 8.
Yeah. No, I hear you. So I'll give you the example of Danielle Smith, right? We said all those things about Danielle. Like 3 years ago, everybody's like, wow, look at her, listen to her. She's amazing, 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 amazing. Yeah. And then behind the scenes, I belong to 3 constituency associations, that elected 3 different MLAs. And I talked to guys like David Parker, and I talked to a whole bunch of people on the inside in Alberta. I went to the AGM. I'm seeing what's happening. Okay. And I see that Kenny did the same thing. They come in, they sound good. That Dahlia girl might sound good, but once they're in, the powers that be, it takes crazy, crazy, crazy conviction and courage to do those things. That's why I said Poilievre's got this short list. I think his courage will kind of fade. The real courage is a guy like Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump's type of courage is crazy. Like, it's he's been threatened. Like, think of what they did to him, right? They threw the book at him. They tried to kill him. They tried to convict him. They literally threw the entire book at him, and he resisted. For anybody else, including me, like, I could talk all tough right now. I'm tough. I get in there, and suddenly, the people are knocking on my door and pissing me off and threatening my family, and all of a sudden you're done, right? I don't have I'm being realistic. I'm just Joe Schmuck,
No, I totally appreciate that. Totally. And I appreciate your take on Daniel Smith too. It's frustrating because that's why, I mean, I don't know, I'm not going to speak for Darren, but I just don't trust any politicians. I don't trust Poilievre going in, because he hasn't really said much at all except for cutting the tax. I mean, he doesn't have the balls to go up against the climate change agenda. He's never going to go get rid of net zero. He's going to just be.
Never even went up against the jabs. Till it was cool.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah, and what was I going to say? Oh yeah, and Daniel Smith, and she was saying all the right things, and I'm at least she's saying all the right things, but Trump is setting a high bar now for politicians to follow through with what they say.
Yeah. I would argue that Danielle Smith's done a pretty good job of putting her money where her mouth is on a few things. We were the first jurisdiction in the world to come out and apologize for how unvaccinated people were treated during COVID at extreme political consequence. We were, if not the first, one of the first jurisdictions in the world to ban puberty blockers and stuff like that for people under 18, which we took a whole bunch of heat. I mean, I was just tweeting today how how, I'm old enough to remember, because I think someone else just banned. Well, the US has banned it now, the UK, all these other European places, it's getting banned all over the place. I think Australia's now banned it. And I'm like, I'm old enough to remember when everyone in Alberta was getting called hillbilly bigots because our leader had the balls to go out ahead of the curve and say some of these things. And like I say, she was just getting called a traitor by 30 million people in the country, last week. I'd like to think it's a little less than that.
Yeah, no, she's resisting. She's doing good, but one of the, you made me think of this. One of the things that changed in the last 25 years is literally the makeup of the country, right? This crazy multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity has created a beast in and of itself that's extremely hard to manage. And I see Danielle having to do that. Like, I go to the AGM last, 3 months ago, and I'm like, holy shit, there's this big giant Muslim group, and then there's these Christian guys, and then there's the rednecks from the middle Alberta, and then there's
the woke.
And the woke and the city people, and it's like, holy shit. So, and as soon as you trying to find the common ground between anybody is such a complicated thing. That's where the US, I think, is beautiful. They do still have a more obvious common ground. Our common ground, man, I don't know where it is. And I think Pierre's going to face that. Like, he, even something that sounds as simple as say opposing immigration and trying to slow it down. You talk about slowing down immigration. I'm surprised. There's I can point out all the problems with this high speed immigration that we have right now, and there's still people go, oh no, we can't do that. They're thinking selfishly about mom and dad or their uncle somewhere. I'm like, finding common ground is so brutal. But Trump, this is where Trump is helping us, right? Trump is defining some of the common ground. Like, if you can have whatever opinion you want on let's say climate change. If Trump says, I'm pulling out of the Paris Accord, I'm not allowing any of my banks to do net zero, and I'm firing everybody who's DEI in government, we can dig in our heels and say we're going to keep doing climate change. No, we're not, right? So he's forcing some common ground our way.
Yeah. It feels
like going to force us to be efficient.
He's forcing some hard decisions, I think, in Canada, right? Because it's not as easy as just beating your chest and saying Canada will be fine. I mean, it's at this age where we don't just have the news to say it's all going to be fine because we're going to do this. There's all these different voices that are kind of like, hey, we might be fucked here. And at the very least, it pulls to the forefront that our entire country is sort of dependent on other countries, which is maybe fine. Maybe that's the way it has to be. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, where the one thing that's been exposed in the last 5 years, even probably longer than that, in your opinion, is that Canada probably has no business being a country. I mean, it really has no business being one big country, because it's never going to change. There's no instance in the world that Alberta ever gets a fair, like, you could live in Alberta, you can think this, you can think freedom, whatever, but it's just you don't have democracy. You don't have democracy. You're living under someone else's democracy.
It's just an enormous country that is where the population is weirdly spread out. That's the problem, right? I mean, we have this. It's a simple logistic problem. Like I said, you got 50% of the population that lives in a teeny weeny little chunk in the bottom corner in the middle over there, and then the other 50% is spread all over the place, and we don't have a lot in common. I mean, we have
almost every province. Like, you could take the major city in every province, and if a major catastrophe happened, touch wood, we don't want that to happen.
Yeah,
who's coming to the rescue?
Yeah,
the closest state are going to be the first people on the scene helping out, because the closest city is 1,000 miles away.
Yeah. We have very different problems and priorities across the nation. Like, New Brunswick's got an aging population that doesn't work, and they want healthcare and for old people. And then you got Alberta with younger families who are worried about schools at this point. I mean, you got parts of the country that are saying, like, you have seniors in some parts of the country saying, why are we still paying school taxes? We've paid our fair share. And their preoccupation is their pension, their OAS, and something else. And then you got guys in the Northwest Territories, man, they got preoccupations that you and I don't even, never think of. I mean, I have friends who live in places where, you know, you're still driving on dirt roads, and that's a preoccupation. So yeah, it's a complicated country to manage.
I just wish we could sort of be split. Like we're it seems like the last, let's say 10 years, we're sort of getting into these ideological differences and in all the Western nations. And I just feel like I wish we could just be split and have a chance to thrive like within sort of a like-minded group in a country sort of setting. Right. But we're all split in all these different ways. And maybe that's the eternal struggle and it's always going to be like that. But I feel like with the internet now, like we're finding these sort of similarities and differences. And I wish we could sort of capitalize on I don't know, I guess.
Yeah. And physically. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. And I'm going to throw this out too. Like I've said this a few times, like if we were starting Canada today, would we design it the way we have? Probably not. Right. And so, and actually that's a frustration that I hear often. Like, you know, we formed our country in 1867, like almost a full 100 years after the Americans. The Americans did it in 1776. And I still think they had a better system. So why didn't we just copy their system? But then right from the get-go, we didn't fight from the king. We didn't fight for our independence. He gave it to us with a whole shit ton of rules. And some of those rules today are completely silly. So we would need, and so some days I can convince myself that the country can be repaired, but then that thought usually passes because I go, yeah, is Quebec and Ontario, are they really going to give up what they have? Like, would I if I was there?
That kind of leads to a couple questions from Monica again. She says,
well, not only that, before you go to that, there's the demographic collapse that we're sort of marching into at the same time. Like, what do Ontario and Quebec and New Brunswick look like in 10, 20 years?
You know, I haven't been to Ontario and Quebec in about 5 years. I should go visit. Is it getting old? Yeah, it's probably getting older, right? Is what you're saying?
I think that's Alberta. I mean, another caveat or another point for Alberta going its own way eventually is that I was listening to something the other day that was saying we are the youngest out of all the like Western world. Alberta's got the youngest and maybe not most productive, but the youngest and whatever population.
We have the youngest population, but we still have a problem. We are not reproducing. We're lucky. In Canada, there's only 4 or 3 provinces that are growing naturally, meaning they have more births than deaths. Alberta is the leading one, but barely. And then Ontario and Saskatchewan, so as young as our population is, we're not having kids. So without immigration, I'll say this. Without immigration, Ontario and Quebec are doomed in about 50 years. So,
and Alberta's treading water. Which is better than doomed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can always tell what's going to happen to Alberta by looking at what's happening in Quebec. And you can always tell what's going to eventually happen to Quebec by going to Europe, right? And seeing what's happening in Europe. I mean, Europe is about half a generation ahead of us, and Europe's half a generation ahead of Quebec, and Quebec's half a generation ahead of us.
Has King Charles never said a word about Canada joining the U.S.? Shouldn't he be objecting? And then, of course, the second part of her question is, isn't Canada still a Commonwealth country? But King Charles, hasn't he been quiet? I mean, I guess they're not. I don't think they really say much about Canada. We're sort of like a stealth Commonwealth.
We're definitely part of the Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth is not what it used to be. I mean, it's the Commonwealth is just a bunch of countries that agree that by definition have the king as their monarch, but we don't really have like trade agreements or anything like that among ourselves.
Could the Governor General be weaponized?
Governor General should be just fired.
Because here's the thing. I mean, they say it's all ceremonial, but I mean, the fact that there is someone that could fire our parliament or our prime minister at the behest of that said monarch, it starts to get a little weird. I mean, the weirdest thing for me to see is to see conservative Twitter starting to subvert democracy and say, let's get them to, tell the king to fire him. It's like, well, come on, guys, we're kind of going in the wrong
Actually,
direction.
you made me think of something. That's going to be a cool event in the next couple of weeks, right? The Center for Constitutional Justice there, the JCCC, whatever, is taking the government to court on February 13th and 14th to have prorogation overturned. That could be a crazy game changer. Like if that happens, whoo, that'll be fun.
I think it's going to happen.
I think so too.
I think it's already trending in that direction. I think the judge is already planning on it.
Well, the judge will say, sorry, I think the judge will rule that it's illegal. Now, whether can the judge compel the governor general or the prime minister to do anything? That's the other part of that equation. But yeah, that's going to be crazy. Yeah, bring in Leighton Gray or some of those guys next week and have a chat with those guys.
We're trying to get John Carpe back on because I do want to talk to some of these guys about because I think that at the least, I think a lot of people sort of take the Confederation for granted. I think it's built on a big old fucking house of cards. It's a lot less stable than it is.
You know who you need to bring in for these good constitutional chats? Bring in Bruce Party. Have you guys?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah. Reach out to Bruce, and then I like listening to him. Yeah. He's,
fantastic.
Yeah.
What about Darren? Can we talk about Carney maybe a little bit, or just
Carnival Carney? I still think he's just here to fucking. I still think it's going to get weird at the last minute. I think he's trying to prop up Freeland somehow. There's something weird going on between those two.
No, Carney's got it. He's going to come in and take it. I think that what they're going to do is they're going to get him in with all his narrative, and they're going to get enough of the people that over to them to make it look like the media will make it look like it's kind of neck and neck, and then they'll steal it. I mean, this is what I think is going to happen with the.
I think they wanted to. I think they genuinely wanted to. What's the word? Not the elect, but the
select.
Select. They wanted to select Carney. I think he'd been selected for sure because he'd been talked about in the for the last 3-4 months, and then Freeland resigned. That his name came up more than coincidentally. Then I think that's who they wanted to put, and I think Freeland is genuinely putting up a battle. I think she's genuinely pissed off and putting up a battle. When I look at the number of, I've been trying to keep track on the spreadsheet of who's thrown their weight behind who. It's about 60-40 for Carney, right? So the people are so Freeland's putting up a good battle. The other people, they were just noise, right? Like that area guy, and like they needed, because they said, oh, we're going to have a fulsome deep search of the country for transparent for the best candidate. Bullshit. You guys broke every rule in the book, and you got a couple of people to make it look like it's legit. So it's I think Freeland's putting up a bigger fight than they expected.
Well, I think Freeland and Carney are tighter than people think, though. They're
that for
family.
Sure. Yeah. Well, she said in Quebec. So I listened to her in French 2 days ago. She went to Quebec, and in French, she was very specific. She said that in her opinion, she's better than Carney. She should be the prime minister, and she would make Carney her finance minister. That's what she said. She's like, yes, he's better at me at finance. He's got that right background. And she's trying to promote that the best team would be her in charge and him second in charge. But boy, when she was doing that interview in Quebec, and Carney, right? They both went to Quebec last week. My God, the audiences were like bored out of their skulls. Like those guys neither of them resonates in Quebec. Neither of them. Wow. Not even like the audience in Quebec. It was like it was a very popular daytime talk show with the main host and 6 guests. And the 6 guests never said nothing. Like it was just, oh yeah, it was brutal.
It must be weird. It must be weird for people in America too, to like the Quebec thing is so weird with the Bloc Québécois or whatever, that party that was, I mean, I don't know where it's at right now in the polls, but it was second to.
It would form the opposition if we had an election tomorrow. It would form the opposition.
Like how weird is that? A provincial federal party.
We had it before. We had it in 1997.
Oh, it was 97. Wow.
93 or 97. One of those 2 years we had the Conservatives and the Bloc as the opposition.
Huh.
But in those days, the Bloc was the opposition, but still didn't have all of Quebec. To me, this would be the funniest thing in the world. If I was if I was the conservative leader, if I was Pierre, but he won't do this, I wouldn't even run a conservative in Quebec. I wouldn't.
Why bother?
I would give everything to the bloc and let the bloc, and so then there'd be no conservatives in Quebec, which would mean that there'd be fundamentally no representation in Quebec. Kind of like we have right now, right? There's no liberals out in Western Canada. Who we have? Randy Boissonneau and whatever, right? So let Quebec vote 100% bloc, and then watch what happens. They'll be so pissed off. Their separatist inclinations will go through the roof because they won't get anything. That's the part that I hate. If Pierre wins, say 3 conservative seats in Quebec, he's gonna have to turn all 3 of those seats into powerful ministries, and that just pisses me off. So yeah.
Well, isn't that like the crux of the problem, that even if the best possible solution for Canada gets in, that's more than likely fucking Alberta's fucked?
I don't see any way it's not.
So that begs the question: do you worry about the NDP at all?
No.
Or do you think Alberta's like solid? Like, I mean, on a provincial level now, do you think that the UCP is firmly entrenched through the next election?
The NDP was just this weird aberration. I was here when that happened. We all woke up the next day, went, what? Even the NDP didn't expect to win, right? Half their candidates weren't even in the province the night of the election. They're in Vegas. They're all over the place. The election happens. They're being called. They're like, guess what? You won. They're like, what? So it was just a complete backlash. And Notley got in. And then Notley stayed popular because she's just a popular person. People like her. You know, they like her. I don't like her, but most people, like in Edmonton and people like that, she can play a crowd and people like her. Nenshi, like his party right now is teetering because I went to, you know, I have all my like I infiltrated all the NDP leadership debate during the summer, and Nenshi won the leadership because he brought this big voting machine with him. Like he sold like 50,000 memberships, and then he stole the leadership, and he pissed off the diehards, like Sarah Hoffmans and Janice Irwins and those people who bleed orange. They're pissed off at him. And Nenshi, when he ran, look at this, like there's no NDP logo on here, right? And it's purple instead of orange. And he's already distanced himself from the federal NDP. And then she's going to try and rebrand the party into his own image. And he's got his own internal fights right now. They don't like him. So I'm not even, and I've told Danielle, like, don't even mention it. Don't even mention Nenshi. Because
it's kind of scary close though, wasn't it? I mean, in some of the cities with the NDP, like I was a bit shocked at how well they
because
did.
It was Notley. Notley's still popular, but now like Nenshi's proud of himself. So like I brought in 50,000 votes. Like yeah, you unleashed an army of people and you sold 50,000 memberships on. It's a big difference between selling 50,000 memberships and trying to get 400,000 votes, right? So and he got caught cheating selling his membership. So have you seen Nenshi? He looks like shit, man.
Yeah.
Like,
he was bitching about, what was he bitching about? He was bitching about something. I saw him on there today and I was like, oh my God, that just doesn't look good either. He's just, he's complaining about the $2 million. Oh yeah. The $2 million, report about COVID that we won't even get into now because we don't have time. But I mean, and I was like, dude, everybody's doubling down on that. It's crazy.
You also have to add in that when this last election, we were dealing with the Kenny. We were still have this Kenny thing. Kenny fucking locked us down. It wasn't the NDP. Kenny fucking locked us down. Exactly. Kenny did all that shit. So everyone was pissed at the Conservatives. So I think that the good example was because my buddy from Ontario was bitching about Danielle Smith, this and that the other day. And I said, hey, man, you just got to remember this when you bitch about Danielle Smith and democracy. She is doing that with a very clear mandate from the Alberta people. There's nobody in Alberta that's jumping up and down and freaking out and protesting. I mean, they said it was going to happen, but I'm in downtown Calgary almost every day. And it's just not happening. It's not happening. Everyone seems to be just like, cool, man, just head down and work.
She has a big, strong following. She's loved in other parts. I mean, most of her fan base is actually outside of Alberta. Like she has a very big fan base in Quebec and Ontario, places like that. But yeah, I wouldn't even talk about Nenshi if I was Danielle right now. And then you can disarm Nenshi. I mean, Nenshi literally has to he's violently opposed to anything, they're supposed to be, right? I hate that part of opposition. I mean, I don't think opposition has to be 100% violently opposed to everything,
Right.
but he is crazy opposed to everything. So for Danielle, I'm like, later on when it starts to count and you're campaigning against him, throw in a couple of things that appeal closely to the NDP and let him be against it, and then people will see who he is. But his party doesn't like him, and right now he's in the peanut gallery. I mean, he doesn't even have a seat. So yeah,
and it's 3 years away at best, which is plenty of time for this, that, and the other. So are you optimistic then, before we start to wrap up? Are you optimistic? Because I mean, through all the fervor and all the crap and all the 51st state and the tariffs, I mean, deep down, I'm like, man, I've never been fucking prouder to be an Albertan than I am right now. And I feel like that's going through a lot of people right now.
Oh, that part of me won't change. I'm a proud Albertan. I mean, that's like I won't move to the U. I've worked all over the world, and then every time I come home, I'm just happy to come home. I mean, I think I live in paradise, and I like the culture here, and I'd rather stay here and fight for it than go anywhere else. I'm not giving up and going down south. I'm proud. I'm definitely more optimistic now than I was, say, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the threat of Trudeau and Guilbeault and others was starting to weigh, right? Like it was annoying,
especially during lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely. Poilievre, I got a long list of things. I mean, if Poilievre comes back tomorrow, axes the tax, slows down immigration, gets rid of a few civil servants, and gives me all my gun rights back the way they used to be. I don't even need above and beyond. I was perfectly happy with having to register my handguns and my AR-15 and having to only being able to shoot them at the gun range. That I'm not the guy who's going over the top and say I want my AR-15 walking down the street. I'm not a 2A amendment kind of guy.
I wanted it in my back seat though of my truck.
Sure, I want it in my back seat. I don't want to get in trouble for taking it out of the house, but
I also want my handguns out of the house. I feel like the culture has changed enough in Canada that self-defense has to start creeping in at some point.
I take them when I go hunting, and I'd like to be able to do that legally.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to say that, but dude, they just banned one of my 22s.
Yeah. No, I say that all the time. In fact, here in Alberta, if you're here, you know this. We don't get hounded by the fish cops and whatnot. They do not enforce federal gun laws. So if you, I wouldn't recommend. But
I can attest to that firsthand. I've told the story on the show where I was caught in the bush with my handguns. A buddy was like, "Get out of here."
Yeah, he doesn't they would say they ask the same rules. Like, is it loaded? No, perfect. And you're not hunting with it? I'm like, no, I'm not hunting with it. Then I don't give a shit. And even the have you ever had a conservation officer ask to see your PAL?
No. My buddy was talking about that the other day. I was like, dude, I have never once been asked. I mean, I'm an Indian, so they don't ask me for much anymore. But even there's always this and that, where's your treaty card? Where are you this? Where is you that? Check your gun for the plug. Not once have I ever. The only time I've ever been asked to produce my PAL is when I'm buying a gun or buying ammunition.
Yeah, so that's because it was under Ed Stelmach or one of the other guys during the long gun registry era. There was an edict that went out to provincial law enforcement saying you will not enforce federal gun laws. That's the cops' job, but our fish and wildlife guys. Yeah, show me open the breech. Show me that you don't have a bullet in the chamber. You're not driving around with it loaded. That's fine. Yeah, they're more interested in my insurance and my registration on the quad than anything else, right?
Well, interestingly enough, the guy that came to me was a younger guy.
Yeah,
and he was like freaking out, and he went and fucking called his boss. because he was freaking out. He was taking the guns. I had some 30-round clips with me too that he wasn't thrilled about. And yeah, he went and called his boss and then came back like 20 minutes later. And he's like, yeah, my boss says it's not in the public interest to fuck you guys around. And then when we were leaving, he's like, do you need a note or anything just in case you get pulled over on the way home? You can say I dealt with you already. And I was like, I'm good, man. Let's just
see you later. Yeah,
just go in our separate ways.
I heard through the grapevine that is one of the things that Pierre will do. He will not only will he reverse the gun ban and bring the laws back to the way they were, but I heard that he's going to move firearm regulations more to the provinces. Ottawa will keep the PAL and the gun safety course and registering the firearm owners, but then he'll leave it up to the provinces to decide, storage rules and usage. So if Alberta says we're okay with restricted handguns being used by hunters for protection while they're in the bush, then fine, so be it. And I think that'd be great because it is a no-win. It's one of those things, right? I'm sure politicians in Ottawa, maybe Trudeau is the exception, but a common sense politician like Pierre is going to be like, why do I want to deal with this, right? This is an example of like, let the province deal with it because the attitudes around guns in Newfoundland is completely different than it is in the Yukon and completely different than it is on Vancouver Island. So push that regulatory part back to the cities. I mean, do you think there's anybody? Do you think there's anybody in the Yukon who doesn't carry a handgun while they're out hunting?
Especially in bow season. I mean, I almost stepped on a bear with a cub in bow season. You just got your bow and arrow, man. Like, it's fun when you're hunting stuff and it doesn't know you're there. When you're getting, run down by a grizzly bear, you're going to want that 357 in a hurry. Because here's the thing: it's illegal to have any of your rifles with you,
right?
Because you're not allowed to have any of those kind of guns with you during bow season. So
I can't even have my dogs with me. I hate the rules. Actually, I got my BC rules here. I was gonna have my camp porn.
Well, Marty, this has been great. We'll have to get out shooting sometime. Hopefully, when the fun guns are allowed out again.
Yeah, as soon as they reopen the range, I think we're gonna have a party that day. We're all gonna go shooting. Where are you, by the way? Like you're close.
I'm just south of Strathmore.
Yeah, you're not too far. I mean, I'm northwest, right? I'm in Bearspaw, so I get to Strathmore real quick by taking Stony now, and I get around to Strathmore. Playing hockey against you guys in Strathmore used to be a pain in the ass when I had to cross town, but now it's a lot easier.
Helps.
Yeah,
one of my daughters still goes to school in the Northwest.
So you're like by Mindus, that part of the world, or not quite?
I'm like I'm only about 5
now
miles.
Don't tell us. We don't want people online to know where we live.
I'm in Wheatland. I'm just in Wheatland County where there's a lot less. I was looking at Rocky View, but Rocky View's kind of anal about a bunch of stuff that Wheatland don't give a shit about. So
yeah,
that's where I ended up.
See, I know we're trying to end the show, but that's one of like, look at our country, right? Like, for the folks listening, we're talking about counties in Alberta that are neighboring counties that have different rules. Like, it's nuts, right? I mean, building a deck, and I built a shop in Rocky View. I wanted to kill the guys at the Rocky View permit office because I must have gone there 4 times. And then, but when I lived up north in Grand Prairie and I wanted to build a shop, the guys are like, yeah, okay, whatever.
What are you doing here?
Yeah, what are you doing here? Go build your shop. And so, here they're looking at my drawing right down to like, how many gallons per flush are your toilets? I'm like, what do you mean how many gallons per flush my toilets are? I don't know yet. I haven't well, it says here you got to have a low flush toilet. I'm like, in a shop? Like, fuck.
Yeah, it's something else. The worst I've had is my neighbor called and asked me to not blow up Tannerite on Sunday.
Oh, okay.
So I was like,
fair enough.
He's fair enough.
Fair enough.
Marty, this has been great. We'll have to do this again sometime. We appreciate the insights into Canadian energy and Canadian politics and stuff like that. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, anytime.
Where can people find you?
They can find me at Marty Up North, the way it's written on the screen. It's written a little bit different. It's Marty Up North with _2 on Twitter. The 2 is because I had my previous Marty Up North was blasted for was censored and destroyed, and then Marty Up North _1 was censored and destroyed. Back in the days, man, talk about COVID and stuff like that got you banned on Facebook, on Twitter. So yeah,
I just got back after 2.5 year ban. I finally got back on. So
find me on Twitter, folks, and actually do me a favor. You can go find me on YouTube as well. Like I have been on YouTube for 10 years, and I have, the stuff we talked about hunting. I have hunting videos and hiking videos. It's a little more fun. If you want to watch one of my videos while doing your workout or on the treadmill, do that. Warning to anybody who goes and look at my Twitter feed. It is full blown political blood sport.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Marty, thanks again. Come back.
Cheers, guys.
Take care.
Good night.
And that was a chat with Marty Up North. Check him out on Twitter. That was a good. What do you think?
Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, we should do more Canadian stuff like that.
It was a good one. We kept it all in the free section for you guys this week. We did it all for free. We didn't cut it off. We figured we don't do much of this stuff, so it's a good insight for a lot of our audience into what's going on. It's like there's no more inside baseball than that. It's not just a political thing. It's like conversations that are coming up with me almost every day.
Yeah.
Where it's like, on one of the job sites or this or that or the other, it's like, fuck this, we got to get out, something. It's either 51st state or independence, but none of it is like stick around with what we're doing right now.
No.
None of it. So, and I like that idea of using the U.S. 51st state as to like, well, you don't want that, but you don't want this. Well, it almost makes that independence shine a little brighter.
Yeah.
No debt. We'd be debt free.
Yeah.
We could have an Alberto.
Yeah.
That'd be the coin. Alberto. Anyway, big thanks to Marty for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Sign up for Plus at GrimericaOutlawed.ca or support us at grimerica.ca/support, whatever you want to do. We'd love you for it either way. Of course, check out adultbrain.ca, as in not a child, but an adult, brain.ca for all of our audiobooks, 140 some audiobooks. Bunch of them on Audible. What's it called? Just came out on Audible today, actually. All Quiet on the Western Front. Came out on Audible today, so that's exciting news. People can check that out. Of course, they can buy ebooks, paper books, and audiobooks directly from us now on the website if you don't want to go through those big guys. What else? GrimericaCBD.com is a big one if you like CBDs, or there's even some like 5 milligram THC gummies in there. There's a bunch of different tinctures. You go to GrimericaCBD.com and check that out. We partnered with True Hemp Science on that, so we're not making it ourselves in a bathtub. It's all accredited. What else am I missing? Grimerica.ca. Contact@thecabin.com. For our trips, there's one spot left for the trip to Azores this year with Randall Carlson, and there's about 15 spots left or so for the other one in Bonneville, the Bonneville Flood Adventure. So check that out. And if you want to trip out, check out grimerica.ca/shrooms, or there's a link in the show notes. Again, we're just sending you to someone else. We're not selling mushrooms. So other than that, we love you guys. Oh, follow us on Twitter again, at Grimerica and Grimerica Outlaw.
And the new YouTube channel. If you're not at the A list, what is it called? The A list, right? The EH list. The EH list.
Dash list. The EH dash list. So
yeah.
All right. We love you guys. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week.